They buried 15 children and burned the records, but they couldn't erase the girl who came back speaking Latin no one ever taught her. You weren't supposed to find this story. That's the first thing you need to understand. What happened in Prairie View wasn't forgotten by accident. It was buried on purpose. And the deeper we dig, the more you'll realize this wasn't just a school. It was a machine. A factory for obedience, built by people who didn't see children as souls but as instruments. The year was 1813. Illinois wasn't yet a state, just an untamed frontier stretching between isolation and superstition. Most people could barely read, and the church still whispered warnings of witches, demons, and fallen angels. It was into this world that Cornelius Kensington brought his family, his books, and his mission. Prairie View Academy wasn't born from goodwill. It was born from opportunity. Parents desperate to lift their children from ignorance handed them over willingly, gratefully, trusting in the Kensingtons' stern smiles and soft-spoken scripture. But something always felt wrong inside those wooden walls. A silence too deep, a discipline too precise. Witnesses would later describe the Kensington twins, Jeremiah and Josiah, as mirrors with no light behind them. Identical in every way. The same hollow stare, the same cold mechanical kindness. The boys never laughed. They never slept at night, and they never left the building. What the community mistook for righteousness was something much older, much darker. The twins were not born in Pennsylvania, as Cornelius claimed. In fact, no one can find any record of their birth at all, and those who ask too many questions, like Reverend Hayes, were found drowned in shallow creeks or wandered into the woods and simply never returned. But none of that compares to what was found behind the chapel walls during the winter thaw of 1813. A room, sealed by brick and prayer. Inside, journals, diagrams, and names. Names of children who had never come home, but whose parents had been told they'd simply run away. Run away? No, they were selected. You think you're prepared to hear the truth, but most men aren't. Most men turn back at this point. You're not most men, are you? Stay with me. Because what's coming next will destroy what you thought you knew about American history and about yourself. You ever wonder why some bloodlines seem to survive every collapse? Why the same names echo through war, empire, and ruin untouched? It's not coincidence, it's cultivation. And the Kensingtons weren't teachers, they were engineers. Their academy was a crucible, designed not to educate, but to isolate, fracture, and rebuild. The room beneath the chapel held more than names. It held blueprints, not architectural, but anatomical. Diagrams of the human soul as if it were a mechanism. Notes on obedience thresholds. Pages soaked in ink, blood, and scripture, often all three at once. One drawing labeled Stage 40 Ascension showed a child's body bound to an altar made of desks. Above it, a Latin phrase, ex carnis dominatio, from flesh domination. Matilda Kensington once said to a grieving mother, "God takes the brightest first." But Matilda wasn't speaking about God. She was speaking about herself, and what she believed she was entitled to. She ran the girls' quarters with iron grace, teaching silence as virtue and submission as salvation. The girls were trained to not cry, not flinch, not question. The ones who did were sent below, a phrase that, at the time, seemed metaphorical. It wasn't. A child named Elise tried to run. She made it to the river before Jeremiah found her. When they brought her back, she didn't speak for days. Then suddenly she began muttering words no one understood, a dead dialect of ecclesiastical Latin. Her mother swore Elise had never learned to read. 2 nights later, Elise vomited black water and died. The next morning, the other children were told she had been possessed, but possession implies something was let in. This was about what was being put in. You see, the Kensingtons believed in something ancient, older than Christianity, a system of control that required sacrifice not just of bodies, but of identity. They weren't trying to educate, they were trying to erase, to empty a child of everything they were and fill the void with doctrine. Every punishment was part of the process, every isolation, every meal withheld, every whispered prayer in the dark, all of it calculated. Pain wasn't failure, it was design. And yet the most disturbing part, the parents, many of them knew, they just didn't want to believe. If you're still watching, you're not like them. Now listen closely, comment below twice. Obedience is not virtue. Wants to remember. Wants to transform. There was a reason no one could trace the Kensington twins' birth. Because they weren't born. Not in the way you understand it. There were whispers buried in confiscated court transcripts and private clergy journals, suggestions that Jeremiah and Josiah were not children of man but creations. A ritualized conception, timed with a blood eclipse in 1789, during a shadowed gathering in the hills near Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Cornelius Kensington didn't father them. He summoned them. One entry in Reverend Hayes' private notes reads, "The boys have no shadow by candlelight." Another, smuggled from the journal of a Methodist circuit rider, describes the twins chanting in unison in a forgotten tongue while standing barefoot in the snow for hours, their skin unmarked by the cold. You think this is superstition? Think again. The American frontier wasn't just a wilderness of trees and animals. It was a wilderness of beliefs, a battleground for competing forces. Freemasons, Rosicrucians, Jesuits, proto-occult sects, breakaway religious orders, all vying for control of the New World's spiritual blueprint. The Kensingtons weren't rogue actors. They were conduits, sent to establish a beachhead. Prairie View Academy wasn't a school. It was a test site. And the children weren't students. They were raw material, blank slates onto which a new order could be etched. One of the sealed testimonies, recorded before the suppression orders were handed down, came from a boy named Caleb who survived 2 years inside the academy before being pulled from the brink of death during a routine illness inspection. He was found in a crawl space, hidden among bones and wax-sealed scrolls. What he told the doctor broke the man's mind. Caleb described night classes in the cellar where the twins would draw symbols on the floor, ask the children to speak the old names, and cut their own palms in offerings. One phrase repeated over and over, Numen Dater, Memoria Toliter. The name is given. The memory is taken. Caleb said he could no longer remember his real parents. And here's where the horror becomes something deeper. Psychological control wasn't a byproduct. It was the goal. The academy didn't just erase memories. It implanted new ones, rewriting identity, obedience, and belief through trauma, ritual, and repetition. Sound familiar? This same blueprint, this system, didn't die with the Kensingtons. It evolved, it modernized, and if you think it only happened in 1813, you haven't been paying attention. This isn't history, it's a prototype. When the territorial authorities finally came for the Kensingtons, it wasn't because of justice, it was because of containment. Understand this, they didn't storm Prairie View to rescue children, they came to erase evidence. The academy was firebombed under the guise of an accidental blaze. Bodies were quietly buried. Witnesses were relocated. The official report was a single page-long stamped, resolved, and the men who signed it, 3 would go on to hold high office in the newly forming state. The cleanup wasn't messy, it was surgical. But a few things slipped through. A charred journal fragment found years later beneath a collapsed beam detailed something the twins had called the 5th bell, a final ritual, a replacement. According to the writings, once the 15th child had been cleansed, a new entity would descend, a being, without age, without name, but with memory of flame. The purpose, not destruction, instruction. It wasn't about murder, it was about replication. Now look around you. Think about how the systems you trust raise your children. Think about standardized obedience disguised as education, about pharmaceutical sedation, about screens designed to hypnotize, about algorithmic thought loops teaching boys to forget who they are. What the Kensingtons pioneered in blood and candlelight is now done in fluorescent classrooms and digital blue light. They tested it on the 15 children in a one-room schoolhouse. Today it's scaled across millions. And here's the part no one wants to admit: this was never about children. It was always about men. Men who could remember. Men who could resist. Men who could pass truth down in silence, father to son. If you erase the child, you erase the man before he's made. That's the real war. The Kensington twins vanished after the fire. No bodies were found. Some say they drowned in the Sangamon. Others say they were taken in by a traveling preacher and reappeared decades later in Kentucky under different names. But the most compelling theory comes from a secret letter sent to a bishop in 1830-70. The brothers walk among us still. They do not age. They do not bleed. And they are building again. You may laugh. You may dismiss this as frontier myth. But answer me this: why did the records stay sealed until 1974? Why do the descendants of the original suppressors still sit on educational boards and advisory councils today? And why, after all this time, do some boys still wake up in the night screaming Latin they never learned? There's one final piece. In 1974, a federal archivist named Benjamin Aldrin, low-ranking, invisible, loyal, was tasked with inventorying unprocessed documents from the old Illinois Territorial Court. He opened a mislabeled crate expecting land disputes. Instead, he found the sealed Kensington file. Inside, burned school records, a broken iron crucifix, sketches of ritual circles, and a letter. 1 page. No signature. Just this: "They will come again when obedience is mistaken for goodness, when the fathers are asleep and the sons have no names. They will not teach, they will mold, they will erase. And this time, you will call it progress." Benjamin tried to report it. He vanished 3 weeks later. I want you to look around your world now with different eyes. Look at the system's training submission from birth, the quiet shaming of defiance, the fear of speaking a truth that doesn't match the script. You think these are modern issues. They're refinements, the same machinery, only smoother, more palatable, hidden in choice, wrapped in benevolence. The Kensingtons didn't vanish, they multiplied. Their ideology was absorbed by institutions, masquerading as reform, evolution, safety. But underneath, the principle never changed: break the soul early, and you will never need chains. Prairie View was just the prototype. You want to understand why you feel numb, why you forget what matters, why rage bubbles under your calmest moments. It's because your instincts haven't been destroyed, just drowned. They're still there, waiting, scratching against the walls they were told to accept. And you've always felt it, haven't you? The moment something inside you knew school didn't make you stronger, it made you quiet. Church didn't fill you with God, it filled you with fear. And the world kept promising freedom while handing you finer cages. But not anymore, because now you know. You've heard what was never meant to surface. You've walked through the ash of a place they tried to erase. You've met the truth behind the lie, and you'll never be the same. So here's your last task comment again. Twice. Obedience is not virtue. Once for your bloodline. Once for the men still asleep. And if you share this video, do it carefully. This kind of knowledge doesn't spread without cost. But maybe that's the point. Because the next generation doesn't need teachers. It needs rememberers. And now so do you.